Shy waitress greeted mafia boss's Sicilian mom. Her Sicilian dialect greeting had every guest frozen. The Wolf of Manhattan was untouchable until a shy waitress greeted his mother in a dialect that hadn't been spoken in his restaurant in 30 years, and suddenly every weapon in the room was drawn. She wasn't supposed to know those words. She wasn't supposed to exist. Because the family she claimed to be from was massacred 3 decades ago, erased from history by the very people now staring at her like she'd risen from the grave. One phrase, 7 words, and the entire Licciardi empire started to crumble. Before we begin, please take a moment to support this channel by clicking the like, share, and subscribe button so you can keep enjoying awesome stories like this. Thank you. Casa Licciardi was a fortress disguised as fine dining. Perched on a discreet corner in Manhattan's financial district, its name whispered power, and its doors opened only for those who commanded it. Senators broke bread beside tech oligarchs, and Wall Street titans felt privileged just to secure a reservation. But the staff, and indeed, everyone who mattered in New York, knew who the true sovereign was. Zoran Licciardi, the Wolf of Manhattan. He owned the building, the block, and half the judges who dined there. Zoran was a man carved from modern granite. Sharp Tom Ford suits that cost more than most people's cars, slicked-back dark hair, and a neck decorated with tattoos he kept hidden beneath designer collars. His eyes were cold, calculating, the kind that could assess your net worth and your life expectancy in the same glance. He was the new generation of Cosa Nostra, a CEO with a body count, a businessman who spoke in quarterly projections and blood oaths with equal fluency. And Casa Licciardi was his throne room. And then there was Bianca. Bianca Moretti was a ghost in this gilded cage. She was small, unassuming, and possessed a singular talent for invisibility. Her black uniform was always immaculate, her dark hair pulled into a severe bun so tight it seemed to pull her features into a permanent mask of deference. Her face, delicate, pretty in a soft, forgettable way, was always tilted toward the floor. She was the definition of the shy waitress, a background detail in a world of blinding, dangerous power. She needed this job. The anonymity was her armor. The generous tips were her escape fund, or so everyone believed. Tonight, the air in Casa Licciardi wasn't just tense. It was vibrating with danger. The kitchen, usually a symphony of controlled chaos, was silent except for the rhythmic clack of knives against cutting boards. Julia, the maitre d', a sharp-eyed woman who ran the front of house with military precision, looked pale enough to faint. Even Zoran Licciardi, who typically held court at his usual table, the one with clear sight lines to both entrances and a reinforced wall at his back, was pacing near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the darkening Manhattan skyline. He was waiting for his mother. La Madrina Maria Licciardi was not a woman. She was a legend, a myth from the old country. She was the true power behind the Licciardi name, a figure of such ancient and absolute authority that even her own son, the Wolf of Manhattan, the man who controlled half of New York's underworld, was still just a boy playing dress-up in her shadow. She had not set foot on American soil in 15 years. Her arrival was not a social call. It was an inspection, an audit of blood and loyalty. You. Julia's voice cracked like a whip, her finger jabbing toward Bianca. Private dining room, table 1, tonight. Bianca's blood ran cold. The private room? That was reserved for Zoran's most sensitive meetings, the ones where business was conducted in whispers and sealed with violence. She had spent 6 months actively avoiding that room. Me? Bianca's voice came out smaller than she intended. But, Julia, I thought Sophia was. Sophia, Julia hissed, leaning in close enough that Bianca could smell her expensive perfume mixed with fierce sweat. Dropped a plate near Don Licciardi's consigliera last week. She's been reassigned. Permanently. The word hung in the air with dark implications. You are quiet. You are fast. You do not exist. Do you understand me? Tonight, you are not a person. You are a pair of hands. Nothing more. Go. Bianca swallowed the lump of terror in her throat and nodded, her hands trembling so violently she had to clasp them behind her back to hide it. At 7 o'clock sharp, 2 black armored SUVs glided to the curb outside Casa Licciardi. The front doors of the restaurant had been closed to the public an hour earlier. Zoran Licciardi stood at the entrance in a posture of respect he showed for no one else, shoulders back, head slightly bowed, hands clasped in front of him. From the second vehicle, she emerged. La Madrina Maria Licciardi was in her late 70s, but she seemed to command more space than men half her age. She was short, barely 5 feet tall, but she moved with the gravity of a queen. Dressed entirely in elegant black, her silver hair swept back in a chignon. She held a polished wooden cane that looked less like an aid for walking and more like a scepter of office. Her face was a map of Neapolitan sun and old-world power, dominated by sharp cheekbones and eyes so dark they seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. She didn't walk. She glided, the cane tapping a measured rhythm against the pavement. Beside Zoran stood his inner circle. Carlo Vinto, the underboss, slim, 40-something, with an oily smile and eyes that never stopped calculating. Marco the Fist Russo, the enforcer, a man who looked like he'd been assembled from concrete blocks and bad intentions. They were a portrait of modern mafia power: expensive suits, discreet weapons, dead eyes. La Madrina ignored them all. She walked past her son, giving him only the briefest nod, a dismissal disguised as acknowledgement, and entered the restaurant. She didn't admire the crystal chandeliers or the priceless abstract art that decorated the walls. She simply paused in the center of the dining room and inhaled deeply, as if tasting the very air for weakness. "She's in the room," Giulia whispered urgently to Bianca, pressing a silver tray into her trembling hands. "Water. Still. No ice." And Bianca. Giulia's grip on her wrist tightened painfully. "Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not make eye contact. Do you understand?" Bianca's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She balanced the tray, the crystal glasses rattling softly, betraying her fear. She pushed open the heavy oak door to the private dining room. The air inside was thick with cigar smoke and the metallic scent of power. 24 people sat around the long mahogany table. Zoran Kapos, a U.S. senator, a federal prosecutor whose moral flexibility was an open secret, 2 shipping magnates with ties to Eastern Europe. All of them sat rigid in their chairs, afraid to breathe. La Madrina was seated at the head of the table like a dark queen. Zoran sat to her right, looking for all the world like a prince desperate for approval. Carlo Vinto sat to her left, his smile fixed and false. Marco stood against the wall, a statue with a gun. Bianca moved to the table, her eyes locked on the polished wood surface. She poured water for La Madrina first, her hand steady, a small miracle given the terror singing through her veins. She moved to pour for Zoran. "So," La Madrina said, her voice a low rumble like distant thunder. She wasn't speaking English. She wasn't even speaking the proper Italian they taught in universities. She was speaking the deep, guttural, almost Arabic-inflected Neapolitan dialect of the old families, the language of blood and secrets, of power passed down through generations in whispers and violence. She gestured dismissively at the opulent room, at the modern art, and the floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing Manhattan's glittering skyline. Her words, though Bianca understood every syllable, were lost on most of the room. "All this," she said in dialect, "it is yours." Zoran stiffened. He replied in Italian, clean, grammatically correct, but lacking the soul of the dialect. His American accent was detectable even to untrained ears. "Yes, Mama. I built it for the family." La Madrina's lip curled in a tiny, almost imperceptible sneer of disappointment. She hated the clean Italian. It was the language of Rome, of politicians and bureaucrats who stole from the people. It was not the language of their people. "You built this," the old woman said, switching back to pure dialect, "with American money. Soft money. Everything here is soft. Like you." Zoran's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. Around the table, the English speakers shifted uncomfortably, sensing the disapproval even if they couldn't understand the words. Carlo Vinto, ever the ambitious fool, tried to interject in mangled dialect. "Con rispetto, Madrina, our organization." La Madrina held up a single weathered hand. The room plunged into silence, so absolute that Bianca could hear her own heartbeat. The old woman had not given Carlo permission to speak. His face drained of color as he sank back into his chair. La Madrina looked around the table, her dark eyes moving from face to face, and in each one, she saw strangers. Men who wore her name, but had forgotten what it meant. She pushed her water glass away in disgust. "Water," she muttered in dialect, her voice dripping with contempt. Like a child, her black eyes landed on Bianca, who stood frozen against the wall, still holding the empty tray. La Madrina saw her only as furniture, a servant, a nothing. She barked an order in rapid Neapolitan, not to her son, but to the heir, to the servant. "Wine. Red. One that tastes of the earth, not smoke." Immediately, Bianca froze. This was the moment, the pivot point of her entire life. She was supposed to nod, terrified, scurry to Julia for instructions, and return with whatever bottle someone else selected. She was supposed to be invisible, but the words La Madrina had spoken, they were the language of her grandmother, the language of her childhood nightmares and her secret lullabies, the language of Sunday dinners and whispered stories about a family on the other side of the ocean, the language she hadn't spoken aloud in a decade. Zoran, embarrassed by his mother's abruptness and perhaps trying to save face, began to translate to English. "She wants wine. Red." I heard her," Bianca said. Her voice was soft, but it cut through the cigar smoke and the tension like a razor through silk. Zoran's head snapped toward her, his gray eyes wide with shock. Carlo's smile vanished. Marco's hand dropped instinctively toward the weapon holstered beneath his jacket. Around the table, conversations died mid-word. Bianca took one step forward, away from the wall. She was no longer a ghost. She was no longer invisible. She looked directly into the black, merciless eyes of La Madrina Maria Licciardi, an action that could get a servant killed in the old country. But Bianca didn't bow in servile fear. She dipped her head in the old way, a gesture of respect between equals, a greeting saved for family. And then, in the same pure, low, flawless Neapolitan dialect that La Madrina herself had used, the dialect of blood and honor, the dialect that outsiders were forbidden to speak on pain of death, Bianca replied. "Zia onorata, o sang tujo e tornato a casa." Honored aunt, your blood has returned home. The effect was instantaneous. It was as if Bianca had detonated a grenade in the center of the table. If she had pulled a weapon, the reaction could not have been more immediate or violent. The U.S. Senator's fork clattered to his plate. The federal prosecutor went pale as a corpse. Marco's hand was fully on his gun now, his body tense to draw. Carlo Vinto half rose from his seat, his chair scraping back with a screech, his face drained of all color. Zoran Licciardi went absolutely still, his expression frozen in complete disbelief. He stared at Bianca as if she had suddenly sprouted a second head, as if the laws of physics had just inverted before his eyes. He looked at this shy waitress, this girl he'd barely registered as human, this creature who cleared plates and poured wine, and heard the impossible. It wasn't just that she spoke the dialect. That alone would have been shocking enough. Outsiders didn't learn it. It wasn't taught in schools or language apps. It was passed down through blood, whispered from grandmother to grandchild, protected like the family jewels. But it was how she spoke it. She didn't stumble over the words like a student reading from a textbook. She didn't have the hesitant, careful pronunciation of someone who'd learned it secondhand. She spoke it with the terroir, the earth, the salt air, the narrow sun-baked alleys of Naples. Her pronunciation was flawless, invoking the old country as surely as if she'd been born in the shadow of Vesuvius. This was the language of secrets, meant to exclude the outside world. And she spoke it like she was born to it. But it was La Madrina's reaction that truly paralyzed the room. The old woman had not moved, not a muscle, not a breath, but her eyes, which had been dull with disappointment just moments before, suddenly ignited. They became sharp, focused, lethal. She stared at Bianca with an intensity that was a physical weight, pinning her to the spot like a butterfly to cork. For 10 seconds that felt like 10 years, nobody breathed. Then La Madrina spoke, her voice deadly quiet, each word measured and sharp as a blade. "Repeat what you just said. To understand what happened next, you need to understand who Bianca Moretti really was. And to understand that, we have to go back 30 years, to a small villa outside Naples, to a night when a family was torn apart by betrayal, or what everyone believed was betrayal." Bianca's words still hung in the air like smoke from a gun. La Madrina's eyes bored into her, searching, dissecting, remembering. But to understand the weight of this moment, to understand why every person in that room looked like they'd seen a ghost, You need to know who Maria Licciardi truly was. She hadn't always been la madrina, the godmother, the queen of shadows. But she had always been dangerous. Born in the narrow, sun-baked streets of Naples in 1947, Maria Castellano married into the Licciardi family at 17. By 25, she was a widow with an infant son and a crumbling criminal empire that her dead husband's rivals were circling like sharks. Everyone expected her to fold, to remarry for protection, to fade into the background like a proper Neapolitan woman should. Instead, she built an empire. They called her La Madrina not because she was kind, though she could be, to those who earned it. They called her that because she was mother to an organization built on fear and absolute loyalty. While other families fought wars in the streets, Maria fought hers in boardrooms and back alleys, with ledgers and leverage and, when necessary, bullets. She made alliances that shouldn't have been possible. She eliminated rivals who thought her soft. By the time Zoran was old enough to understand what his mother truly was, the Licciardi name commanded respect from Rome to New York. And now, at 78 years old, she stood in her son's Manhattan fortress and judged it with the eyes of someone who had built kingdoms from rubble. The greeting between mother and son had been a study in controlled tension. Zoran had met her at the entrance with the kind of deference he showed no one else. He'd kissed both her cheeks formally, left, right, left, the old way. His movements were careful, measured, like a man handling live explosives. "Mama," he'd said in Italian, his voice carefully neutral. "Welcome to New York." Maria had studied him for a long moment, her dark eyes cataloging every detail. The expensive suit, the concealed tattoos, the American polish that covered his Neapolitan roots like paint over rust. Finally, she nodded once, a gesture that could have meant approval or dismissal. "So this is your kingdom, figlio mio," she'd said, her voice carrying the weight of judgment. "Let us see if it is worthy of our name." Their dynamic was impossible to miss. Tense, respectful, but with an undercurrent of something deeper, expectation, perhaps, or disappointment. Zoran was the Wolf of Manhattan, but in his mother's presence, he was still just a boy seeking approval from a woman who rarely gave it. The private dining room had been prepared with meticulous care. 24 guests, all chosen for their importance. 3 of Zoran's capos, including Carlo Vento and his ever-present shadow Marco Russo. A U.S. senator whose vote had been purchased years ago. A federal prosecutor whose flexibility in interpreting RICO statutes had proven invaluable. 2 shipping magnates with ties to Eastern European ports. A tech billionaire who needed certain problems to disappear. Lawyers, consultants, power brokers. All of them frozen in respectful terror the moment La Madrina entered the room. She took her seat at the head of the table like it had always been hers. Because, in truth, it had. Zoran sat to her right, Carlo to her left. The placement was deliberate, symbolic. The future and the present, flanking the past. Bianca had been in the service corridor when Julia found her, the maitre d's perfectly manicured hand clamping onto her wrist like a vice. "You," Julia hissed, her usual composure cracking. "You're serving the main table tonight." Bianca's blood had turned to ice water in her veins. "Me? But I thought." "Don't think. Do. Listen carefully." Julia's grip tightened, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. "Do not look at La Madrina. Do not speak unless spoken to. You are furniture tonight, Bianca. You are a pair of hands, nothing more. Capice?" Capice. Bianca had whispered back. But inside, beneath the trembling fear and the racing heart, there was something else. Determination. Purpose. The culmination of 6 months of careful planning. This was it, she thought as she balanced the silver tray loaded with crystal glasses. 6 months of preparation. 6 months of invisibility. Tonight, I would step into the light. The dinner began with all the warmth of a mob tribunal. The conversation was in English, stilted, formal, utterly false. The senator told a joke that no one laughed at. The prosecutor discussed a recent case with the passion of someone reading a phone book. The capos spoke in careful euphemisms about business opportunities and territorial agreements. And Maria Licciardi sat at the head of the table, looking profoundly, devastatingly bored. She said little. She ate less. Her dark eyes moved from face to face, and in each one, she seemed to find the same thing, disappointment. These were not the men of honor she remembered. These were businessmen in expensive suits, playing at being criminals. When she ordered wine, she did so in proper Italian, the textbook kind, grammatically perfect but soulless. Not the dialect. Not yet. Asterisk vino rosso, per favor. Qualcosa di corposo. Asterisk red wine, please. Something full-bodied. Bianca moved through the room like a shadow, her presence barely registering. She poured water with steady hands, a small miracle given the terror singing through her nervous system. She delivered the first course of crudo di pesce, raw fish arranged like art on bone-white plates. She refilled glasses before they emptied. And the entire time, Maria didn't even glance at her. To La Madrina, Bianca was just another servant, another piece of furniture in her son's American palace. But Bianca was watching, waiting, listening. She watched Carlo Vinto sitting there in his hand-tailored suit, his smile oily and self-satisfied, his eyes constantly calculating angles and advantages. He was discussing a real estate deal with one of the shipping magnates, his gestures expansive, his confidence absolute. Carlo Vinto sat there, smug and confident, having built his entire position on a lie that destroyed families. People like him. They erased the innocent to climb higher, burned bridges made of human bones to reach their thrones. They counted on silence, on fear, on the graves of their victims staying quiet forever. If you despise those who destroy families for ambition, who sacrifice honor for power, then you understand why Bianca couldn't stay silent. You understand why some debts can only be paid in truth. Asterisk if you stand against backstabbers who built empires on graves, let that be known. Comment family over lies because people like Carlo Vinto thrive in silence. Asterisk. Bianca moved to refill the wine glasses, starting with Maria's. The old woman was picking at her food, her expression making it clear that even the Michelin-starred cuisine was beneath her standards. Or perhaps it wasn't the food she found lacking. Perhaps it was everything else. As Bianca poured the second glass of wine, a Barolo that cost more than most people's monthly rent, something shifted. Maria suddenly switched languages. She began speaking in rapid Neapolitan dialect, the sacred tongue of the old families, directing a question at her son about family obligations and blood loyalty. The room went silent. The English speakers tensed, understanding only that the language had changed and that they were now excluded. The few Italians present strained to catch words they could barely recognize. And Bianca knew. This was her moment. The moment her grandmother had prepared her for. The moment 6 months of invisibility had been building toward. The moment when everything would change. She took one breath, then another, and she stepped forward from the wall, into the light, and spoke words that would bring a dynasty to its knees. Maria's voice cut through the artificial politeness like a knife through silk. She turned to Zoran, her dark eyes sharp and assessing, and spoke in rapid Neapolitan dialect, not the sanitized Italian of Rome, but the ancient, guttural language of their ancestors. Asterisk dim, figlio mio, che significa l'onor e famiglia piety. Asterisk, tell me, my son, what does family honor mean to you? Zoran stiffened, his fork pausing halfway to his mouth. He understood enough to catch the gist, but his response came out clumsy, Americanized, the words stumbling over themselves like a drunk trying to walk a straight line. Asterisk l'onor, e tutto mama. La famiglia e la cosa più importante. Asterisk. Honor is everything, mama. Family is the most important thing. His pronunciation was off, the rhythm wrong. He sounded exactly like what he was, a second-generation American trying to speak his grandmother's language and failing. Maria's disappointment was visible, etched into the lines of her weathered face. She set down her wine glass with deliberate precision. You speak like a tourist, Figlio, she said, still in dialect, her tone making the words sting worse than any slap. Like someone who learned from a book, not from blood. Around the table, the tension ratcheted up another notch. The non-Italian speakers shifted uncomfortably, sensing the criticism even if they couldn't understand the words. The Italian speakers looked anywhere but at Zoran, embarrassed on his behalf. Carlo Vinto, ever the ambitious fool, saw an opportunity. He leaned forward, his oily smile in place, and attempted to speak in dialect, his version even worse than Zoran's, vowels flattened, consonants in all the wrong places. Asterisk Madrina, Con respeto, noi, asterisk. Maria's head turned toward him with the mechanical precision of a gun turret locking onto a target. She didn't speak. She simply looked at him. That single look was enough. Carlo's words died in his throat, his face flushing red as he sank back into his chair like a scolded child. Maria looked around the table, her gaze moving from face to face. Her son, his underboss, the capos, the bot politicians, the power brokers. And in each face, she saw the same thing, strangers. She muttered to herself in dialect, her voice low but carrying in the sudden silence. Asterisk song circondita, I forstieri se portano o nome mio. Asterisk. I am surrounded by strangers who wear my name. The words landed like stones into still water, rippling outward in waves of shame and anger. And Bianca, standing against the wall with an empty tray clutched in her trembling hands, felt her grandmother's voice echo in her mind. Remember, piccola mia, Isabella had whispered on her deathbed, her papery hands clutching Bianca's with surprising strength. Asterisk, the greeting is sacred. It's only spoken between blood. When the moment comes, and it will come, you speak these words. You speak them clearly. You speak them with pride. And you let the truth do the rest. Asterisk. Bianca's heart hammered against her ribs. 6 months. 6 months of preparation, of invisibility, of waiting for this exact moment. Her grandmother had made her practice the words until they were burned into her soul. The greeting reserved only for blood. She set down the tray, and she stepped forward from the wall. The effect was immediate. Every eye in the room turned to her. The invisible waitress suddenly moving without being summoned, without permission, without fear. It was wrong. Servants didn't do this. They didn't exist unless called upon. Carlo's hand moved instinctively toward his jacket, toward the gun he kept holstered beneath his left arm. His eyes narrowed, his body tensing like a snake preparing to strike. Zoran's voice was low, dangerous, confused. What are you doing? Bianca didn't answer him. She wasn't here for him. She stopped 3 feet from Maria Licciardi's chair. Close enough to speak intimately. Close enough to be killed instantly if this went wrong. She bowed her head, not in the servile, subservient way she'd been trained to do as a waitress, but in the old way. The way equals showed respect to elders. The way family greeted family. And then she spoke. Her voice was clear, steady, and utterly perfect. The Neapolitan dialect flowed from her lips like water from a spring, natural and pure, with the exact inflection and rhythm that could only come from years of immersion, from childhood lessons, from blood. Asterisk zia honorata. O sang tujo e tornato a casa. Asterisk. Honored aunt, your blood has returned home. The freeze was instantaneous. It was as if someone had detonated a silent bomb in the center of the room. Time seemed to stop, suspended in amber. The senator's fork clattered to his plate, the sound obscenely loud in the sudden silence. The federal prosecutor went pale, his expensive wine forgotten halfway to his lips. Marco Russo's hand was fully on his gun now, his massive body coiled and ready. Carlo Vento half rose from his seat, his chair scraping back with a screech, his face draining of all color until he looked like a corpse. Zoran's expression was complete and utter disbelief. He stared at Bianca as if she'd just performed an impossible magic trick, as if reality had fractured and reformed into something incomprehensible. But it was Maria's reaction that truly paralyzed the room. The old woman didn't move. Not a muscle. But her eyes, those dark, calculating eyes that had seen empires rise and fall, locked onto Bianca's face with the focused intensity of a predator identifying prey. Or perhaps recognizing something far more dangerous, family. For 10 seconds that felt like 10 hours, nobody breathed. Then Maria spoke, her voice deadly quiet, each word measured and sharp as a razor blade. Repeat what you just said. Bianca felt the weight of every eye in the room on her. She felt Carlo's hatred, Zoran's confusion, Marco's readiness to kill. But she also felt her grandmother's hand on her shoulder, felt the weight of 30 years of silence and exile and stolen truth. She stood straighter. Her voice came out stronger now, infused with certainty and generations of denied heritage. Asterisk. O sang tujo e tornato a casa. Zia? Asterisk. Your blood has returned home, aunt. I am Bianca, daughter of Rosa, granddaughter of Isabella Licciardi. The bloodline you thought was lost. The room exploded. Shouting erupted in Italian, English, a chaos of voices overlapping and climbing over each other. Hands reached for weapons. Chairs scraped back. The carefully controlled dinner party dissolved into barely contained violence. Carlo Vinto was on his feet, his face purple with rage or fear or both, his finger jabbing toward Bianca like a weapon. She's lying. She's a spy. She's playing you. Kill her. Marco moved, his gun clearing his holster. But then Zoran stood, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade through fog. Asterisk nobody moves. Asterisk. The Wolf of Manhattan had spoken. The room froze again, this time in obedience rather than shock. In the chaos, in the shouting and the drawn weapons and the barely controlled panic, one truth crystallized with perfect clarity. They wanted Bianca dead before she could even speak her truth. That's what the guilty do. They silence the witnesses, bury the evidence, erase the inconvenient. The powerful don't debate, they eliminate. If you believe everyone deserves to speak their truth without being silenced by those who fear it, then you understand why Bianca risked everything. You understand why some stories must be told, no matter the cost. Asterisk comment truth over power if you stand against those who silence the innocent. Let it be known where you stand. Asterisk. Maria Licciardi raised her wooden cane. She brought it down once on the marble floor. The crack echoed like a gunshot, sharp and final. Silence fell like a curtain. She stared into Bianca's eyes, searching, dissecting, remembering, looking for ghosts in the features of the young woman before her, looking for her sister in the shape of a nose, the set of a jaw, the defiant tilt of a chin. And then she whispered, her voice breaking for the first time in decades. Asterisk Luiki, Isabella. Asterisk Isabella's eyes. You have Isabella's eyes. Maria's voice cut through the chaos with the authority of someone who had commanded empires. Clear the room. All of you. Except Zoran, Carlo, and the girl. It wasn't a request. It was a command that had moved armies, that had ended wars, that had built dynasties. The guests didn't need to be told twice. The senator practically stumbled over his chair in his haste to leave. The federal prosecutor grabbed his coat and fled without making eye contact. The shipping magnates, the tech billionaire, the lawyers, they all filed out in terrified silence, their expensive shoes clicking against the marble floor like a retreating army. Within 2 minutes, the private dining room that had held 24 people now contained only 5. The heavy oak door closed with a sound like a tomb ceiling. Maria Licciardi sat at the head of the table, her cane resting against her chair, her dark eyes never leaving Bianca's face. Zoran stood to her right, his expression a war between confusion, anger, and something that might have been hope. Carlo Vinto remained to her left, his face a carefully constructed mask that was beginning to crack at the edges. Marco Russo positioned himself by the door, his hand resting casually on his weapon, a statue with a gun, ready to execute judgment. And Bianca stood in the center of it all, her waitress uniform suddenly feeling like armor that was far too thin. Maria spoke, her voice still in dialect, but slower now, deliberate. If you are blood, you will know things. Things Isabella would have taught her daughter. Things no outsider could learn, no matter how well they researched, no matter how clever their spy craft. She leaned forward slightly, her gaze boring into Bianca like a drill. What prayer did the Licciardi women say before bed? The room held its breath. Bianca closed her eyes for just a moment, and she heard her grandmother's voice, cracked with age but still strong, still insistent, teaching her the words in the tiny queen's apartment that smelled of garlic and regret. She opened her eyes and spoke in perfect dialect, her voice clear and reverent. Asterisk Santa Lucia, ca vid int oscuro, pruiteg a famiglia mia in enate. Guarda I creature, guarda I mam, guarda I nami nuost. Esi onimico vene. Faca diventa cicado cum te, asterisk. Saint Lucia, who sees in the dark, protect my family in the night. Watch over the children, watch over the mothers, watch over our name. And if the enemy comes, make them blind like you. Maria's face flickered, a crack in the stone facade. Her lips moved silently, forming the words along with Bianca. Tears gathered at the corners of her eyes, but didn't fall. Not yet. Question 2, Maria said, her voice rougher now, thick with emotion. Where did Isabella hide our mother's jewelry when the Carabinieri raided our home in 1987? Bianca didn't hesitate. In the false bottom of the olive oil barrel in the cellar. Third barrel from the left. She told me it was still there, that she'd carved a small mark into the wood, 3 lines like a crown, so she could find it again. Zoran's head whipped toward his mother. Mother, is this true? Maria nodded slowly, tears finally spilling down her weathered cheeks. The jewelry is still there. In Naples. In the villa. I never moved it. I thought she was dead. I thought there was no one left to give it to. Carlo's panic was rising now, visible in the way his hands gripped the edge of the table, in the thin sheen of sweat on his forehead despite the air conditioning. She could have learned these things. Researched them. Old records, property files. Someone could have told her. She's playing you, Madrina. Maria's head turned toward him with glacial slowness. Silenzio, Vinto. Her voice was soft, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. Carlo's mouth snapped shut, his jaw working silently. Maria stood from her chair, moving with surprising grace for a woman her age. She walked slowly around the table until she stood directly in front of Bianca. This close, Bianca could see every line in her face, every year of power and loss and violence etched into her features. Final question, Maria whispered, and now her voice was barely audible, meant only for Bianca. What was the nickname Isabella called me when we were girls? The name no one else knew. Not our brothers. Not our parents. Just the 2 of us. This was it. The final test. The one piece of information that couldn't be researched, couldn't be guessed, couldn't be faked. Bianca stepped closer, close enough to smell Maria's perfume. Something expensive and old-fashioned, like roses and gunpowder. She whispered the answer, her voice breaking with emotion. Stella, little star. Because you were born during the meteor shower of 1947, and Isabella said you were her miracle from the sky. Maria's composure shattered like glass. Tears streamed down her face, decades of grief and guilt and loss pouring out in silent sobs. She reached up with both hands, cupping Bianca's face the way a mother holds a child, the way a sister might have held another sister, decades ago, in a different world. Sang Del Mio sang. Maria whispered, her voice breaking. Blood of my blood. Carne mia. Flesh of my flesh. She pulled Bianca into a fierce embrace, and Bianca's own composure crumbled. She clung to this woman she'd never met, this grandmother she'd only known through stories, and she wept. Nana Isabella told me everything before she died. Bianca sobbed into Maria's shoulder. She made me promise to find you, to come home, she said. She said the truth had been buried too long. Zoran's voice exploded across the room. Mother. Maria didn't let go of Bianca, but she turned her head to face her son. You told me Isabella died in 1989. Zoran's voice was shaking with rage and betrayal. You said the entire bloodline was eliminated. You stood at her funeral, a closed casket because there was no body, and you told me she was dead. You lied to me. Maria's voice was steady now, hardened by necessity. I protected you from a truth you were too young to understand. I'm 45 years old. I'm the capo di tutti capi. And you kept this from me. Zoran's hands slammed down on the table, making glasses jump. What else have you lied about? What else don't I know about my own family? The tension between mother and son crackled like lightning about to strike. Maria released Bianca but kept one hand on her shoulder, a gesture of protection and possession. Isabella was my sister. I spent 30 years believing she betrayed us, that she deserved her exile, that her death was justice. But her daughter stands here, alive, and I will not make the same mistake twice. Carlo Vento saw his opening and took it. Don Zoran. With respect, we don't know her intentions. She could be here for revenge. For blood. The daughter of a traitor, coming back to finish what her grandmother started. Bianca turned to face him, and the shy waitress was completely gone. In her place was something harder, sharper, forged in 30 years of exile and loss. The only blood I want is truth, Vinto. Something your family has hidden for decades. Carlo's fear was a living thing now, written in every line of his body. The guilty always panic when the truth comes knocking. They've built their lives on lies, constructed their empires on foundations of sand and secrets, and they'll do anything, anything, to keep those lies buried. If you can't stand people who destroy others to protect their own secrets, who sacrifice innocence to maintain their power, then you understand why Bianca couldn't walk away. Hit subscribe if you stand against those who build empires on lies, because only guilty cowards won't. Carlo's face went from pale to purple, a vein throbbing visibly in his temple. His jaw clenched so tight Bianca could hear his teeth grinding. And she saw it. The flicker that passed across his features, the expression of a man who knows his secret is about to be exposed, who knows the walls are closing in. He turned his head slightly, just enough to catch Marco's eye. He nodded once. A signal. And Bianca realized with absolute crystalline clarity, she wasn't going to survive the night. Maria's hand remained on Bianca's shoulder as she addressed the empty room. "Bring them back," she commanded, her voice carrying the weight of decades of absolute authority. The heavy doors opened, and the guests filed back in, confused, terrified, whispering among themselves. What had happened behind those closed doors? Who was this waitress who had somehow survived a private audience with La Madrina herself? Maria waited until every person had retaken their seat, until the room was silent with anticipation. Then she spoke, her words deliberate and final. "This is Bianca Licciardi, blood of my blood. She is under my protection." The shock rippled through the room like a stone thrown into still water. Eyes widened. Mouths opened in silent questions. The senator looked like he might faint. The federal prosecutor's hand trembled as he reached for his wine glass, then thought better of it. Maria gestured to the empty chair beside her, the seat of honor, the place typically reserved for the most important guest. "Sit, nipote mia, my niece." It was unprecedented, unthinkable. A waitress, a servant, sitting at the table as family. But no one dared object. Not when La Madrina had spoken. Bianca sat, her heart still racing, very aware of every eye on her. Across the table, Zoran watched her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Suspicion mixed with curiosity, anger tempered by something that might have been reluctant respect. He hadn't spoken since his mother's revelation, but his silence was heavy with unasked questions. Carlo Vento sat several seats down, his face carefully neutral, but his eyes were calculating, measuring, planning. He'd gone very still, the way predators do before they strike. The service continued, though the staff moved with nervous uncertainty now. New courses arrived. Brasato al burlo beef braised in wine, the meat falling apart at the touch of a fork. Fresh pasta with black truffles. Artichokes prepared in the Roman style. And wine. A rare Barolo, 1978, a legendary vintage. One of the bottles from Zoran's private collection that cost more than most people earned in a month. Julia herself poured, her hands shaking slightly as she moved around the table. When she reached Bianca's glass, she paused for just a fraction of a second, a moment of hesitation, of uncertainty about whether a former colleague should be served like a guest. Maria's sharp glance decided the matter. The wine flowed, dark as blood, into Bianca's crystal glass. Bianca reached for it, her fingers closing around the delicate stem, and Zoran's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist. Everyone froze. Zoran lifted the glass from her hand, his grip on her wrist firm but not painful. He brought the glass to his nose and inhaled deeply, his eyes narrowing. Something was wrong. Something was off. He looked up, his gaze landing like a laser sight on Carlo Vento. Who poured this? Carlo's mask of neutrality didn't crack. One of the staff, Don Zoran. Why? Is there a problem with the vintage? Zoran ignored the question. He stood, still holding Bianca's glass, and called out sharply. "Julia." The maitre d' materialized beside him, her face pale. "Yes, Don Zoran." "Who poured the wine for this glass specifically?" I did, Don Zoran. I poured for everyone from the same bottle." "Where is the bottle?" It's in the kitchen. I brought it up from your cellar myself." "Who had access to it between the cellar and this table?" Julia's voice trembled. I don't know. I was in the kitchen preparing the service. The bottle was on the counter. Any of the staff could have." Zoran's voice cut through her stammering. "Marco." The enforcer stepped forward, a mountain of muscle and loyalty. "Empty this glass into a napkin. Carefully. Don't let any of it touch your skin." Marco's expression didn't change, but he moved with the precision of a man who understood the gravity of the command. He took the glass, tilted it over a white linen napkin, and let the wine pool into the fabric. A few drops remained clinging to the crystal. Zoran handed the glass to one of his men standing by the wall. "Test it, now, and bring me the results before anyone leaves this room." The man disappeared through a side door. 5 agonizing minutes passed. No one ate. No one drank. The only sound was the ticking of an antique clock on the mantelpiece and the shallow breathing of 24 terrified people. Maria watched her son with new respect, her expression unreadable. This was the Zoran she had raised, suspicious, thorough, protective of what was his. Perhaps he was more Licciardi than she'd given him credit for. Bianca's heart hammered against her ribs. Someone had just tried to kill her. The realization settled over her like ice water. Someone in this room, someone with access to Zoran's private wine collection, had poisoned her glass. The door opened. The man returned, his face grim. He leaned down and whispered in Zoran's ear. Zoran's face went cold, deadly. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He spoke one word: cyanide. Chaos erupted. Guards materialized from the walls, weapons drawn. Guests screamed, some diving under the table, others frozen in their seats. The carefully controlled dinner party dissolved into pure panic. Asterisk, nobody moves. Asterisk, Zoran's roar cut through the chaos like a blade. Silence fell again, but now it was the silence of prey animals hiding from a predator. Zoran walked slowly around the table, his movements deliberate, controlled. He stopped behind Carlo Vento's chair. "Underboss, my most trusted lieutenant. Tell me, who had access to that bottle?" Carlo's voice was steady, but a thin line of sweat had appeared on his forehead. "Don Zoran, I swear, I had nothing to do with." "The bottle," Zoran interrupted, his voice soft and infinitely more dangerous for it, "was from my private collection. The 1978 Barolo. From the locked cellar beneath this restaurant. Only 3 people have keys to that cellar. Me, my mother, and you." Carlo turned in his chair, his face a portrait of wounded innocence. "Don Zoran, please. Someone must have copied the key. Or perhaps one of the staff." "The staff doesn't know the cellar exists," Zoran said flatly. "It's a family secret. So tell me, Carlo, how did cyanide get into a bottle from my personal collection?" Carlo opened his mouth to respond, but Maria's voice cut across the room. "Carlo Vento." The underboss's head snapped toward La Madrina. For the first time, real fear showed in his eyes. "Your father, Antonio, was my consigliere 30 years ago. Do you know what he did?" The silence in the room was absolute, suffocating. Carlo's face began to drain of color. Maria stood slowly, leaning on her cane, but her voice was strong and clear. "He framed my sister Isabella. He told me she was informing to the Carabinieri that she'd married a police spy. He fabricated evidence, paid witnesses, destroyed her reputation. He orchestrated her exile, and when that wasn't enough, he sent men to kill her. All to eliminate a rival branch of the family. All to consolidate his own power." She pointed her cane at Carlo like a weapon. "And now you, his son, sit at my table, drink my wine, and try to poison her daughter? The sins of the father truly do pass to the son. They say the sins of the father pass to the son, and Carlo Vento was living proof. He'd inherited more than his father's position. He'd inherited his cowardice, his willingness to murder the innocent to protect himself, to bury truth under bodies rather than face it. If you despise those who hurt others just to save their own skin, who poison wells rather than drink from them honestly, you understand why justice had to be served. Comment, cowards poison, warriors face truth, if you stand against the guilty." Carlo's hand moved toward his jacket. Marco stepped forward, gun already drawn, and aimed at Carlo's head. Zoran's voice was ice. "Give me one reason I shouldn't end you right here, Vento." Carlo's hands were raised now, palms out, the universal gesture of surrender. But his eyes were still calculating, still searching for an exit that didn't exist. "Don Zoran, please, I can explain." Maria's voice cut across the room like a whip crack. "Then explain. Tell us why you tried to murder my niece." Carlo's carefully constructed composure crumbled. Surrounded by armed guards, outgunned, with nowhere to run and no allies left, he cracked. The words tumbled out in a desperate rush. "My father, He told me before he died. He said Isabella was going to testify against the family, that she'd made a deal with the federali, that she was going to destroy everything we'd built. He had to act. He had no choice. Maria's fury was a physical presence in the room, radiating from her small frame like heat from a furnace. Asterisk, your father lied? Asterisk. Her cane struck the floor, the sound like a gunshot. Isabella never betrayed us. She took the blame for me. She sacrificed herself to save this family. Zoran's voice was sharp, confused. Mother, what are you talking about? Maria turned to face the room, her dark eyes burning with 30 years of guilt and grief. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of confession. 1989. A coup was forming within the Licciardi family. Giuseppe Marino and his faction, they wanted to overthrow me, take control of the organization. They said a woman had no right to lead, that I was weak, that my rule would destroy us. She paused, her weathered hands gripping her cane. They had evidence, real evidence, that I had ordered the death of Captain Domenico Ricci of the Naples police. And I had. He was going to raid our warehouses, seize our assets. I did what needed to be done. But if that evidence reached the Carabinieri, it would have been the end. Not just of me, of all of us. The room was silent, transfixed. Isabella saw the plot coming before I did. She was always the clever one, always 3 steps ahead. She saw that Marino was gathering allies, preparing to hand that evidence to the authorities if I didn't step down. So she made a choice. Maria's voice broke slightly. She married Carlo Romano, a low-level criminal whom Marino's people had identified as a possible police informant. She knew the family would see it as betrayal. She knew I would have to act against her. And she let it happen. Bianca felt tears streaming down her face as she listened to her grandmother's sacrifice laid bare. The family labeled her a traitor, Maria continued. I banished her, publicly, dramatically. Marino's faction had their target. Isabella, the supposed informant, the betrayer. They focused all their rage on her instead of on me. Her betrayal gave me time to consolidate power, to eliminate the coup before it could succeed. Maria's voice hardened. But Antonio Vento saw an opportunity. He was my consigliere, my most trusted advisor. He convinced me that Isabella hadn't just pretended to betray us, that she had actually done it. He showed me fabricated evidence, paid witnesses. He made me believe my own sister had tried to destroy me. The old woman's hands trembled on her cane. I gave the order. Elimination. Complete and final. Antonio sent men to America to hunt Isabella. But she vanished, disappeared into poverty, into anonymity. She saved herself and her daughter. Zoran's face was pale. Mother. Antonio used Isabella's disappearance to consolidate his own power, Maria said, her voice thick with rage and regret. He became indispensable to me. My right hand. He built the Vento family's position on that lie, on my sister's grave. She turned her gaze back to Carlo, and her eyes were merciless. I have lived with this for 30 years. When I finally learned the truth, 5 years after Antonio died, it was too late. Isabella was gone. I thought her daughter was gone. And you, Carlo, you've been sitting at my table, drinking my wine, building your position on your father's lie. Carlo's final defense came out as a desperate plea. I didn't know. My father never told me the full story. I swear, Madrina, I thought Isabella was a real traitor. I thought. Liar. Bianca's voice cut through his protest. She stood, facing Carlo across the table. You knew. That's why you panicked the moment I spoke the dialect. You knew exactly who I was. She reached into her uniform pocket and pulled out a small envelope, yellowed with age, the paper soft from decades of handling. She walked around the table and placed it in Maria's hands. My grandmother kept this. She said it was insurance, proof of what your family did. It's from Antonio Vento to his son, dated 2005. Read it. Maria's hands shook as she opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. The handwriting was neat, precise, the words written in formal Italian. She began to read aloud, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. She read in dialect first, then Zoran translated for the room. My son, the Licciardi girl child, may still live. If she ever returns to Italy or makes contact with the family, you must end her immediately. She is the only witness to what I did. She is the only one who knows the truth about Isabella's innocence. Protect our name. Protect our position. Do what must be done. The room was dead silent. Carlo was trapped. The evidence was undeniable, written in his father's own hand, a confession from beyond the grave. Zoran's voice was quiet, but it carried more menace than any shout. You've been my underboss for 10 years. I trusted you with my life. I broke bread with you. I called you friend. Carlo's mask finally shattered completely. His face twisted with desperation, with trapped animal panic. His hand shot toward his jacket, toward the gun holstered beneath his arm. But Zoran was faster. The Wolf of Manhattan drew his weapon in one smooth, practiced motion and fired. One shot. Clean. Precise. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space, echoing off marble and crystal. Carlo Vento crumpled to the floor, a red stain spreading across his expensive white shirt. He was dead before he hit the ground. The room erupted in chaos, screams, movement, the scraping of chairs. But Zoran didn't lower his weapon. He stood over Carlo's body, his face carved from stone. In this world, loyalty is everything, Zoran said, his voice carrying over the noise. But loyalty built on lies and the bodies of innocents? That's not loyalty. That's cowardice. He holstered his weapon and looked around the room, making eye contact with each person present. My father once told me, the man who silences the truth is a man who fears it. Carlo Vento feared the truth, and that fear killed him. The message was clear. This was justice. This was the price of betrayal. And everyone in that room understood it. Subscribe if you believe lies should never be allowed to prosper, because only the guilty won't. Only those who've built their empires on graves and silenced voices would turn away now. Let your choice be known. Marco and 2 other guards moved forward, efficiently dragging Carlo's body from the dining room. Blood smeared across the marble floor, a red trail leading to the door. Julia appeared with staff members, already moving to clean the evidence, to restore order to chaos. As the body was removed, Maria turned to Bianca. The hard edges of La Madrina had softened, revealing something more human beneath. Grief, relief, love. She placed her hand on Bianca's shoulder, her grip firm despite her age. When she spoke, her voice carried to every corner of the room, a proclamation that would echo through the Licciardi family for generations. Bianca Licciardi, I name you blood. I claim you as family. And blood protects blood. The restaurant had been cleared. The guests ushered out with firm instructions to forget everything they'd witnessed, or at least to remember only the version of events that would be told in the morning papers. The dining room, which had been a war zone 20 minutes ago, was now pristine. The blood had been cleaned, the broken glass removed, the tables reset as if nothing had happened. But everything had happened. For people sat at the long mahogany table, Maria at the head, Bianca to her right, Zoran to her left, and Marco standing sentinel by the door. The intimate circle of what remained, or what had been reborn, of the Licciardi inner circle. Maria broke the silence, her voice gentler now, stripped of the commanding edge she'd used earlier. Bianca, you came here for truth. You have it. The family knows what Isabella sacrificed, what my sister gave up to save us all. She leaned forward, her dark eyes searching Bianca's face. But what do you want now? Revenge? Money? We can arrange for you to disappear again, give you a new life somewhere safe. What is it you truly want? Bianca had thought about this question for 6 months, through every shift serving drinks, through every night lying awake in her tiny apartment. She'd rehearsed a dozen different answers. But now, sitting at this table with her grandmother's sister, the answer came simply. I want what was stolen from my grandmother. Her name, her honor. I want the Licciardi family, all of them, in Naples and New York and everywhere else, to know that Isabella died a hero, not a traitor. Maria's composure broke again. Tears streamed down her weathered cheeks. You are more like her than you know, she whispered. Isabella never wanted power. She never wanted wealth. She only wanted to be remembered truly. The old woman reached into her jacket and pulled out a small leather journal, worn soft with age, the pages yellowed and fragile. She placed it on the table between them. This was Isabella's. I found it years after she disappeared. She left it in our mother's grave in Naples, hidden beneath the flowers. It has everything. Her reasons, her sacrifice, her love for this family. She knew I would visit our mother's grave eventually. She knew I would find it. Maria pushed the journal across the table to Bianca. This is yours. Your inheritance. More valuable than money or property. This is proof of who your grandmother truly was. Bianca's hands trembled as she picked up the journal, feeling the weight of her grandmother's words, her grandmother's truth, finally acknowledged after 3 decades of silence. Zoran's voice cut through the emotion, practical and sharp. What happens now, mother? We've just killed my underboss in front of 24 witnesses. Some of them were politicians, prosecutors. We can control the narrative, but there will be questions. There will be investigations. Maria's voice hardened again, the commander returning. We tell the truth, our version of it. Carlo Vinto was a traitor, son of a traitor. He tried to poison family blood. Justice was served according to our laws. The witnesses will say what needs to be said, or they will remember why they fear the Licciardi name. She stood slowly, leaning on the table for support, and made her proclamation. Bianca Licciardi will take her place in this family. She will sit at this table. She will have voice and vote in our business. And anyone who questions this, anyone, answers to me. The words hung in the air, final and binding. Bianca felt the weight of them settling on her shoulders like a mantle. Maria, I'm not a criminal. I'm not. I don't know this life. I came here for my grandmother, not to join. You are Licciardi, Maria interrupted, her voice firm but not unkind. The blood knows, even when you don't. You spent 6 months infiltrating an organization that kills people for far less. You stood in front of me and spoke words that could have gotten you executed. You faced down men with guns and never flinched. The blood knows, Bianca. You are already one of us. Zoran had been silent, watching Bianca with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. Finally, he spoke, his voice thoughtful. You could have poisoned my mother. Could have come here with a weapon, with allies from a rival family. Could have used your grandmother's story to manipulate us, to destroy us from within. He leaned back in his chair, his cold gray eyes assessing her. But you came alone, with nothing but the truth. No backup plan. No escape route. Just a dead woman's journal and the courage to speak forbidden words. That takes more courage than anything I've seen in 20 years of this life. He extended his hand across the table, an offering and a test. Welcome to the family, cousin. Bianca looked at his hand, the hand that had just killed a man, the hand that controlled an empire built on violence and loyalty. She thought about her grandmother, about the sacrifice Isabella had made, about the truth that had finally come to light. She took his hand. The alliance was formed. Maria watched the exchange with satisfaction. Then she did something unexpected. She lifted her cane, the polished wooden cane she'd carried for 40 years, the symbol of her authority, the weapon she'd used to command silence in rooms full of killers. She placed it in Bianca's hands. This was your great-grandmother's, Maria said softly. Carmela Licciardi carried this cane through 2 wars and 3 family feuds. She passed it to me when she died. I should have passed it to Isabella, but I couldn't. I thought she was gone. I thought the line was broken. Maria's hands covered Bianca's on the cane. Every woman in our line who has held this cane has protected this family. Through blood and fire, through betrayal and loss, they protected what was ours. Now you will too. Bianca held the cane, feeling its weight, its history. She could almost feel the hands that had held it before her. Great-grandmother Carmela walking through bombed-out Naples streets, Maria building an empire in the ruins, and Isabella, who should have carried it, but never got the chance. I don't know if I can, Bianca whispered. You already have, Maria replied. As Bianca gripped the polished wood, feeling the weight of generations pressing down on her shoulders, she understood something profound. She had come here, seeking justice for her grandmother. She had found family. She had found her place in a line of women who had survived, who had protected, who had endured. But outside these walls, in the shadows of Manhattan, there were others who would not forgive what had happened tonight. Carlo Vinto had family, cousins, allies, loyalists who had built their positions on the same lies his father had told. They would demand answers. They would demand blood. And they were coming. 3 days after Carlo Vinto's blood stained the marble floors of Casa Licciardi, the restaurant reopened for business. The official story spread through the underworld like wildfire. Carlo Vinto had been discovered embezzling from the family, skimming profits from the shipping operations, selling information to rivals. The evidence was damning. Justice had been swift and final, as it always was in their world. The underworld accepted it without question. Betrayal was as common as breathing in their circles. Justice was always swift. No one mourned Carlo Vento, and those who might have were smart enough to keep their grief private. But everything had changed inside Casa Licciardi. Bianca no longer wore the black uniform of a waitress. The severe bun was gone, her dark hair falling in loose waves around her shoulders. She wore tailored clothing now, elegant but practical, a blend of old-world respect and new-world power. She sat at the family table in the private office above the restaurant, learning the business. Zoran taught her the operations with surprising patience. Shipping routes through Newark and Philadelphia. Real estate holdings scattered across 3 states, some legitimate, others serving as fronts for money laundering. Protection rackets that had been running since his father's time. The legitimate businesses they were building to slowly transition away from the old ways. This is the future, Zoran explained, pointing to development plans for a tech startup investment fund. My mother built an empire on fear. I'm building one on legitimacy. Fear only lasts as long as you're willing to kill for it. Maria taught her the old ways, the codes that governed their world, the rituals that bound families together, the subtle gradations of the dialect that could mean the difference between respect and insult. She spoke of blood debts and ancient obligations, of marriages arranged for alliance and murders committed for honor. The new generation forgets, Maria said one afternoon, her weathered hands wrapped around an espresso cup. They think money and lawyers can replace loyalty and blood. Zoran is right that we must evolve, but we must never forget what we are. The acceptance within the organization was not universal. Some of Carlo's former loyalists whispered in dark corners, a woman, an outsider, given power so quickly? She'd been a waitress 3 days ago, and now she sat at the table with La Madrina and Don Zoran? It was unprecedented, insulting. But Maria's word was law, absolute, and unquestionable. Those who whispered too loudly found themselves reassigned to less prestigious positions. One capo who publicly questioned Bianca's legitimacy disappeared entirely, his body found 3 days later in the Hudson with concrete shoes, an old-fashioned message that some traditions never died. Bianca and Zoran spent hours together, reviewing territories, settling disputes between various factions, planning the family's future. He was impressed by her strategic mind. She saw patterns he missed, thought 3 steps ahead, asked questions that revealed weaknesses in their operations. You should have been doing this all along, he said one evening, studying her across a table covered in financial ledgers. You see things differently than we do. Fresh eyes. She saw beyond his ruthless exterior too. In quiet moments between business, she caught glimpses of exhaustion, of a man tired of violence, of someone who wanted to build rather than destroy. He spoke carefully about legitimizing the empire, about his children, if he ever had any, inheriting businesses rather than blood feuds. The attraction between them was undeniable. It crackled in the air when they worked late into the night, when his hand accidentally brushed hers reaching for the same document, when their eyes met across the table and held a moment too long. They were family, yes, but distant cousins, related by blood but not raised together. In their world, such marriages were not uncommon, were even encouraged to consolidate power. Neither of them spoke of it. Not yet. On the 4th day, Marco brought news that shattered their fragile peace. Dominic Vento is in New York, he announced, his voice grim. Carlo's cousin. He's demanding a sit-down. He's claiming blood debt for Carlo's death. Zoran's face hardened. Let him demand. Carlo was a traitor. There is no debt. He has support, Marco continued. 2 other families, the Russos and the Costellos. They're saying Carlo's execution was too public, too brutal. They're calling it a power grab, saying you used the girl as an excuse to eliminate a rival. The word girl made Bianca's jaw tighten, but she remained silent. Maria's expression was calculating. Dominic is a hothead. Not as clever as his cousin, but twice as dangerous because of it. He'll come looking for blood, not conversation. We handled this by the code, Zoran insisted. Carlo tried to poison family. He was the son of a traitor. Any man in our position would have done the same. Bianca had been listening quietly. Now she spoke. Let me speak to him. Both Zoran and Maria turned to stare at her. What? Zoran's voice was sharp with disbelief. I'm the reason Carlo died, Bianca said calmly. I'm the one who exposed his father's lies. Let me face Dominic. Let me tell him the truth. He'll kill you. Zoran said flatly. The moment you walk into that room, he'll put a bullet in your head and call it justice. Bianca leaned forward, her voice steady and sure. Not if I give him what he really wants. Dominic doesn't want revenge. He wants to restore his family's honor. His uncle Antonio destroyed the Vento name. Carlo tried to protect that lie and died for it. But Dominic? He has a chance to rebuild on truth instead of lies. She looked between Maria and Zoran. I have Antonio's letter. I have my grandmother's journal. I have proof that the Vento family's rise was built on betrayal and murder. If I give Dominic that proof, if I show him that his uncle was an informant who sold out the Licciardis and his own family to federal agents, he'll turn on his cousin's memory, Maria finished, understanding dawning in her eyes. He'll see Carlo not as a martyr, but as a fool who died protecting his father's crimes. It's a gamble, Zoran said, but his tone had shifted from dismissive to considering. It's the truth, Bianca replied. And the truth has power. It saved me. Maybe it can save us all from a war we don't need. Maria and Zoran exchanged a long look, the kind of wordless communication that came from years of working together, of understanding each other completely. Finally, Zoran nodded. We set the meeting. Neutral ground. Tomorrow night. As they finalized the plans, the location, the security arrangements, the terms, Bianca felt the weight of what she'd committed to. She would walk into a room with a man who wanted her dead and try to convince him to let her live. After the meeting broke up, as Bianca gathered her papers, Zoran caught her arm gently. His voice was low, urgent, meant only for her. Bianca, if this goes wrong, if he doesn't accept the truth, I won't let him take you. His hand brushed hers, the touch sending electricity up her arm. I just got you back. I'm not losing family again. Their eyes met, and in that moment, the word family carried weight beyond blood, beyond duty, beyond tradition. I know, she whispered. Tomorrow night, she would face Dominic Vento. In one way or another, the future of the Licciardi family would be decided. The warehouse in Brooklyn was exactly what it claimed to be, neutral ground. No family controlled it, no blood had been spilled on its concrete floors, no ghosts haunted its rusted corners. It was empty except for two groups of people who hated each other and a single table between them. On one side, Zoran, Maria, Bianca, and Marco, flanked by four armed guards. On the other, Dominic Vento, two of his capos, and representatives from the Russo and Costello families. Men in expensive suits with hard eyes and harder reputations. Dominic Vento looked like his cousin Carlo, but where Carlo had been slick and calculating, Dominic was raw fury barely contained. He was younger, early 30s, with the kind of rage that came from believing you'd been wronged. He didn't wait for pleasantries. You killed my cousin in cold blood, in front of guests, in front of witnesses. You executed him like a dog and dishonored the Vento name. Maria's voice cut through his anger like a blade through silk. Your cousin tried to poison my niece. Blood demands blood. The code is clear. The code. Dominic spat. You make up your own code, Madrina. You always have. Carlo was loyal to you for 10 years, and you let your son murder him over some waitress who claims. Careful. Zoran's voice was deadly quiet. Finish that sentence, and you won't leave this warehouse. The tension escalated instantly. Hands moved toward jackets, toward weapons. Marco's massive frame shifted, ready to draw. The Russo representative stood, his chair scraping back. And Bianca stepped forward, into the middle, into the killing zone between two armies. Dominic. Her voice wasn't loud, but everyone froze. The shy waitress was gone completely now. In her place was a woman who had faced down death and found herself on the other side. I'm the one you want. I'm Isabella's granddaughter. I'm the reason Carlo panicked. I'm the reason he's dead. She stopped 5 feet from him, close enough to be shot, close enough to be heard clearly. Let me show you why. She reached into her jacket, slowly, deliberately, and pulled out a yellowed envelope. This is a letter from your uncle, Antonio Vento, to your cousin Carlo, dated 2005. Read it. She placed it on the table between them. Dominic snatched it up, his eyes scanning the words, his face shifting from suspicion to confusion to dawning horror. His lips moved silently as he read his uncle's confession, his uncle's order to murder a child if she ever returned. Your uncle Antonio wasn't just a consigliere, Bianca said quietly. He was a liar and a manipulator who destroyed my family to build his own power. She pulled out more documents, photocopies her grandmother had kept for decades, evidence of crimes Antonio Vinto thought had been buried with him. Bank records showing Antonio embezzled millions from the Licciardi family over 15 years. Photos of Antonio meeting with FBI agents in 1991. Transcripts of conversations he had with federal prosecutors, offering information in exchange for immunity. She laid each piece of evidence on the table like cards in a deadly game. Your uncle, Antonio, wasn't just a liar. He was an informant. He sold out the Licciardis and the Vintos to save himself. When he died in 1998, he left a trail of betrayal that your father never knew about. But Carlo knew. That's why he tried to kill me the moment I spoke. Not for honor, for cover. Dominic's hands trembled as he sorted through the documents. His face went from rage to horror to grief, cycling through emotions too quickly to process. The representatives from the allied families leaned in, reading over his shoulder, their expressions shifting as they realized the implications. My uncle. Dominic's voice cracked. He destroyed our name. Carlo knew. Bianca repeated, her voice gentler now. And instead of cleaning the slate, instead of bringing the truth forward, he tried to bury it deeper. He tried to murder me to protect his father's lie. That's why he died. Not because of family politics. Because he chose cowardice over honor. Dominic stood slowly, the documents clutched in his shaking hands. He walked toward Bianca, and Zoran's entire body tensed, his hand moving toward his weapon. But Dominic didn't draw. He stopped in front of Bianca, then turned to face Maria. And he knelt. La Madrina, Signorina Licciardi. His voice was thick with emotion. I asked forgiveness. My family's debt to yours is unpaid. Carlo's death was justice. I see that now. Maria stood, leaning on the table, her dark eyes assessing him. The Vinto name can be restored, Dominic. Work with us. Prove your loyalty, and your family will rise again, this time built on truth instead of lies. I swear it, Dominic said, his head still bowed. On my father's grave, on my children's lives, I swear it. The representatives from the Russo and Costello families exchanged glances, then nodded. The matter was settled. The sit-down was over. No blood would be spilled today. 1 week later, Casa Licciardi hosted a private celebration. The dining room was filled with the old guard. Capos from 3 states, allies from Italy, power brokers who understood that something fundamental had shifted in the Licciardi Empire. Maria sat at the head of the table, Bianca to her right, Zoran to her left. The symbolism was clear to everyone present. Maria stood, her cane tapping once for silence. For 30 years, I ruled with strength. I built this family from ruins, protected it through wars, expanded it across oceans. But I am old. The future belongs to the young. She placed one weathered hand on Bianca's shoulder, then the other on Zoran's. These two are my legacy. They will lead together. One from blood, one from tradition. Together, they are unbreakable. The proclamation hung in the air for a moment of stunned silence. Then the room erupted in applause. Maria had named her successors, co-heads of the family, equal in power, united in purpose. Later, on the terrace overlooking Manhattan's glittering skyline, Bianca and Zoran stood alone. You know everyone's going to assume we're more than cousins, Zoran said, his voice carrying a hint of amusement. Bianca smiled. Let them assume. We know the truth. And what is the truth, Bianca? She turned to face him, the city sprawling below them like a kingdom waiting to be claimed. The truth is I came here seeking the past, and I found the future. He kissed her then, slow, inevitable, sealing the new dynasty with something that felt like destiny. I walked into Casa Licciardi as a ghost. I emerged as a queen. My grandmother Isabella sacrificed everything to protect her family. I walked back into that family to restore her honor. And in doing so, I found my own. They say blood is thicker than water. But I learned something stronger. Blood remembered is thicker than lies. The Licciardi Empire was built on secrets. I tore those secrets open, exposed the rot, and rebuilt it on truth. And now, standing beside Zoran, with Maria's blessing and Isabella's memory guiding me, I understood. This wasn't just my story. It was every woman who ever had to fight to reclaim what was stolen. Every person who ever had to speak truth to power. Every soul who refused to let lies define them. The dynasty was reborn. And it all started with 7 words in a dialect of blood. If this story moved you, If you believe in fighting for truth no matter the cost, then do something. Hit that subscribe button. Because people like Carlo, like Antonio, they thrive when good people stay silent. They win when the truth stays buried. Don't let them win. Subscribe, share this story, and comment below. Truth over lies, always. Let's build a community where the truth is honored, where family means something real, and where the forgotten are never truly erased. Thank you for listening to Bianca's story. And remember, your story matters too. Don't let anyone silence it.